Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking the source material behind a topic that is just fascinating and honestly deeply relatable for so many of us. We're talking about the hidden psychology of why people can work incredibly hard, literally grinding day in and day out, yet stay completely stuck financially year after year. We're going to uncover the hidden mental patterns, the biological traps, and the deeply ingrained conditioning that keeps us running on that endless hamster wheel without ever actually getting ahead.
Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever met someone, let's just call her Sarah for a second, who is constantly working? I mean, putting in insane hours, dealing with intense physical exhaustion, taking almost zero rest. And yet, despite all that sheer effort, she's still struggling to make ends meet. Contrast that with someone you likely know, who seems to work far less, yet earns considerably more. It's a really frustrating paradox, isn't it? It kind of makes us question literally everything we've been taught about how the world actually works.
So, what does this all mean? It brings us to the big question. Does hard work alone actually create wealth? Well, for generations, we've just accepted this myth that pure, unadulterated effort automatically equals success. Work hard, get rich, right? But the psychology tells a totally different story. Hard work alone does not always create wealth. In fact, staying poor or financially stagnant is very often tied to deeper mental patterns, survival behaviors, and early financial conditioning that most of us don't even realize we're acting out every single day.
Which brings us to part one, the brain in survival mode, or the biological track. We really need to stop looking at financial stagnation as just some personal failing and start understanding the actual biological reality of chronic stress. When you spend years constantly worrying about how you're going to pay the bills, your brain gets hijacked. Literally. Survival mode trains the mind to survive the week, not build the future. When your absolute main priority becomes immediate survival, like just making sure the lights stay on and there's food on the table, your brain completely abandons long-term growth. It's an evolutionary defense mechanism. It shuts off the horizon to focus on the fire right in front of you.
And the biological consequences of living in this mode are absolutely severe. If you've ever felt completely stuck, this is why. Living like this makes it incredibly hard to plan ahead. Your brain naturally avoids taking risks because when you're barely surviving, any risk feels like a mortal threat. You struggle to learn new skills because you just lack the mental bandwidth, and you fail to think strategically. I want to be clear here. It is not a lack of willpower. It's this biological trap that's making planning and risking so incredibly difficult.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about, cognitive overload. So what is it? After constant work and relentless stress, the brain just becomes mentally depleted and exhausted. Because of this, the mind is basically forced to avoid complex decisions, long-term planning, and uncertainty. It quietly traps hardworking people by utterly draining their mental capacity. They aren't unmotivated, their brains are literally just out of gas.
To put that into perspective, look at this breakdown. In survival mode, an estimated 95% of your brain's energy is allocated solely to surviving daily life and putting out immediate, burning problems. That leaves a tiny, insignificant 5% sliver for long-term growth, learning, or any real change. That's it. The exhausting cycle of daily survival consumes almost everything you have. Let's move to and see how this builds into part two, the myth of pure effort, also known as the strategy trap.
This trap is where people try to rely entirely on elbow grease to escape their situation. We've all been taught that classic childhood lesson, right? Just work hard enough and success will automatically come. But psychology shows us this is fundamentally flawed. Effort without direction simply becomes a repetitive struggle. You're essentially just running faster and faster on a treadmill. You're burning energy, you're sweating, you're working incredibly hard, but you're never actually moving forward.
To actually break financial stagnation, just throwing a sheer volume of work at the problem isn't the answer. You must increase specific metrics. You need to increase your value, your skills, your income sources, and your opportunities. If you just work harder every single year without increasing these four things, the amount of effort you expend goes way up while your financial position stays exactly the same. You absolutely have to work smarter and increase your leverage, not just crank up your hours.
That takes us to section 3, fearing risk over stagnation, choosing the devil you know.
So, the crucial point is this truly fascinating psychological reality. Why do people refuse to leave painful life situations even when they have a clear chance to do so? Well, it comes down to a battle of mindsets. On one hand, you've got familiar discomfort. It's a painful life, sure, but it's known, it's predictable, and it feels safe. On the other hand, you have uncertain opportunity, which represents possible growth, but it comes packed with terrifying uncertainty.
For so many of us, the brain's sheer terror of the unknown completely outweighs the desire for wealth.
It really boils down to this. Safety feels emotionally stronger than possibility. If you've been hesitant to make a jump in your life, I want you to know that you aren't incapable of starting a business or changing careers or asking for a better opportunity. Actually, scratch that. It's more like your brain is simply biologically prioritizing emotional safety over potential reward. It prefers the pain it already knows to the possibility that it doesn't.
Which leads us to Section 4, addicted to the struggle, or the emotional trap.
The harder I suffer, the more valuable I am. Wow. This takes us into the deepest psychological layer of our explainer today. Some people unconsciously hold this exact belief deep in their minds. They often develop it from childhood environments where struggle was just constantly praised by parents or authority figures. Over time, this conditioning creates this invisible, unconscious addiction to suffering where you only feel worthy of existing if you're burning yourself out.
For someone conditioned this way, the symptoms are wild. Taking a moment of rest actually creates intense guilt. Finding an efficient way to do something makes them feel lazy. And the idea of making easy money or succeeding in a new, leveraged way, that feels completely undeserved. It's a tragic irony, honestly. For these folks, actually succeeding or finally taking a rest triggers deep feelings of worthlessness.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we flip the script. Section 5, breaking the pattern, your paradigm shift.
Because once you understand these hidden mental patterns, how survival mode literally hijacks your brain, how undirected effort traps you on a treadmill, and how childhood conditioning links your worth to suffering, it completely changes how you see your own life. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Are you addicted to effort, or are you focused on results? It is time to stop glorying the exhaustion, start dismantling these psychological traps, and begin building a life where your efforts actually translate into the wealth and peace you deserve. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.